Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session, The Dark Art of Social Engineering, How Criminals Steal Cash. I'm Erin Englund. I'm the Director of Threat Analytics for North America for BioCatch.
And my name is Ayelet Biger-Levin. I'm a founder of a company called Rangers AI, and the website is ScamRangers AI, and I have a podcast called ScamRangers. So today we'll talk about the dark art of social engineering. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the psychological aspects of social engineering. And there's this notion that it can only happen to the elderly or maybe people with less IQ. So I wanted to share my story with you and talk about how it can really happen to anyone. So a couple of years ago, I got this text message saying, "Hi, Edit, I'm at a conference right now. Can't talk on the phone, but let me know if you got my text. Thanks." And the person who sent this text, his name was Steve, and he was actually a colleague of mine. And I said, "Yeah, hi, I got the text. Thanks. I need you to handle something. Are you free?" So this first question really appeals to the need or the human need to be kind. And of course, I'm free. I'll help you. Well, I'm in a meeting, but I'll try to see how I can help you from my meeting. And then Steve, quote unquote, goes on and says, "I'm at a conference. I need you to pick up some gifts for clients for me." Now, I was working from home. He wanted me to go to the store and get gift cards. And this type of scam is very, very pervasive in the US and other places in the world. And of course, I want to be helpful. So yes, of course, what do you need me to do? And then he goes on and asks for these cards. Now I realize it's a scam because Steve wouldn't ask me. And then all these red flags go in my head. You know, why is Steve not communicating with me over Teams? Why is he writing me from a number I don't know? But when Steve appeals to the kindness, are you there? Starting to create this sense of urgency. And I'm asking him, wait, how urgent is this? Very urgent. Let me know once you get there. And I'm thinking, oh my God, my company's deal is dependent on me going and getting gift cards from the store. So I keep texting with Steve. Steve, it's not really him. And just to understand the anatomy of the attack. No, I didn't leave my house to go to the store. But for the first few texts, I did think it was him. I didn't listen to the red flags in my mind. And eventually, many, many people fall for this scam. After they didn't succeed with me, they did reach out to the rest of my team using the CEO's name instead. And fortunately, everyone knew about this already. Other scam stories that are very pervasive are the following. This is Cindy from Boston, and Cindy got a wrong number scam. So someone reached out to her and said, "Oh, you were in my contacts," or "Hi, is Dave there?" And then she responded, "It's a wrong number," and started corresponding with her and befriending her. And what these scammers do in these scams called financial grooming or pig butchering scams is within a span of 3 to 4 weeks, they create a situation of friendship, not necessarily a romance scam. And then they slowly pivot to try and convince the victim to invest in crypto. And people lose hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in these crypto investment scams. Other scams that target also the elderly are tech support scams. These pop-ups that say something is wrong on your device, call the contact center, the help center, and they then take over, install remote access tools on the people's devices and steal a lot of money from their bank accounts. And finally, the Hi Mum scam is also a very pervasive scam in Australia and the UK, where the criminals just cast a wide net. They send messages, "Hi Mom, this is my new number, delete the old number, my phone is broken," or "I lost my phone," or whatever. And by the fact that the person deletes the old number, they now cannot contact their actual child to check if everything's okay. And then the next request is, "I need money." And this is very, very pervasive as well. Of course, it can happen to men and women, but it really spans across all ages, all geographies, all walks of life. In terms of the size and magnitude of the problem of online scams, it's definitely growing from day to day. And the reality is that financial institutions' account takeover fraud and new account fraud controls have gotten really good. So the criminals are now going after the weakest link, which is humans. And if we look at this graph from the latest FBI report, we can see the numbers in gray represent the number of complaints, and the numbers in red represent the size, the losses in dollars. And we can see the growth to $10.3 billion a year. Now, this is only the numbers that are reported. Globally, the number is closer to 50 or to 55 billion. But it's estimated that less than 7% of people actually report the scams. So the true number is likely in the trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars. And one of the fastest growing scams is the cryptocurrency investment scam, what I mentioned earlier, the pig butchering. Now there's the whole slew of online trading, training groups that emerge on Skype or WhatsApp or Telegram that kind of create this community of crypto investment that you're invited to, even though you never asked for it. The growth is really significant. And this is something that is being dealt with in law enforcement and other places. So let's talk about the human side of scams. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the elderly. These scams really target all ages, and there are different tactics to reach out to different types of ages, communities, financial backgrounds, etc. If we're talking about younger teenagers, there are scams like sextortion that target their shame and try to imitate someone who's actually extorting teenagers, saying that they'll post pictures of them on social media in order to blackmail them for money. Older people in their 20s are targeted to be mule accounts and so on. So there's definitely a wide range. Why do people fall for scams? So first of all, there's lack of awareness. There's also the kindness, the human nature of trying to be helpful, which tricks a lot of people into falling for these scams. There's loneliness, the desire to meet people online and to create a relationship. And then there's fear, which a cybercriminal will put the victim in a sense of fear. Something happens to a family member, a payment that I never made that I'm alerted to, etc. And finally, easy money, the desire to invest and live a glamorous life. So what happens really in the brain, and how do very intelligent people fall for scams? So if we look at the brain, we have the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And the prefrontal cortex is is the newest part of the brain. It's responsible for the rational decision-making, planning, problem solving. The amygdala is the center that's responsible for processing emotions, fear, excitement. And what happens is once those emotions kick in, the amygdala actually hijacks the whole decision-making process. So all the rational thinking goes out the window immediately and responds with fight or flight. So when someone is under stress, they act out of that fear. When someone is excited and thinks that they're going to make money, they act out of that excitement and really hijack the rational decision-making. So now let's talk about the different types of social engineering and also understand the anatomy of the attack when it comes to social engineering to distinguish from account takeover fraud. Erin, to you.
Thank you. So if we want to do something about scams in general, it's really important to understand the tactics that they're using, how to break things down, but more importantly, why they're doing it. What is the end goal of the particular scam? And of course, there's always some financial component, but there's a lot of different methods to gain access to that financial component. So first we have scams that have the intent of credential harvesting. So they're gathering information about the victim. They do data harvesting by means of email, phone, or SMS scam campaigns, so also known as phishing, vishing, and smishing. Victims are tricked into providing either their personal information or their online credentials to give access to an online account. Next, we have the payment scam. So this is where that money movement happens, and it can follow a credential harvesting scam. So note that it's possible to see the fraudster move from one into the next type of scam, and they can come through different online channels. So remote access tool attacks, think about, when it's coming to payments where, the fraudster is gaining access to a bank account, the victims are tricked into installing malware on their device, or a remote access tool could be a genuine remote access tool to grant access to their online account to the fraudster. Next, we have authorized push payment scams. So it's really important to differentiate between the two, whereas the former, the fraudster is accessing the victim's online account and authorizing the payment. In the latter, the victim is coerced into sending payment directly to the fraudster. So the victim is authorizing the payment. Scammers are using a variety of methods to create an emotional response from the victim to hook them into believing this is super urgent, that, you know, there's a lot of money at stake and they need to do this now. Now let's break down different types of scams, go over the anatomy of, you know, what you're looking at step by step. So this is the identity theft or harvesting scam. So that first one I mentioned where they're getting information from the victim. So first, the fraudster obtains legitimate user information, typically from the dark web, or via a phishing or smishing campaign. So I have a couple of screenshot examples here of some really common shipping scams that are coming over text. You might see them in email. They're asking for information or, you know, encouraging clicking on a link. So it could be that your parcel's arriving, or, you know, there's some problem and you need to go in and change the address, or, you know, work out some kind of a customs issue. So once the victim clicks through these links, information is used to gain account access or in further social engineering attacks. Next, let's talk about the anatomy of an OTP phishing scam, and that is online or one-time passcodes. So it's typical to require for online accounts to require one-time passcodes, either for, you know, multi-factor authentication to authenticate the identity of the account holder, or they may be required to send a payment. So in this case, the fraudster's obtaining the victim's bank credentials through a harvesting scam, which we just talked about. The fraudster logs into the victim's bank account. Then the fraudster contacts the victim over the phone and convinces them to provide those one-time passcodes. So they use some kind of a social engineering tactic, possibly posing as someone from the bank, telling them we need access to this account, and also gives that sense of urgency that, you know, this needs to be done right now. The victim, once convinced, will dictate the OTP codes directly to the fraudster who's acting in the online account. The fraudster can then complete the transfer online. Now let's talk about the authorized push payment scam. So again, this is where the victim is authorizing the payment as opposed to the fraudster. So the fraudster hooks the victim through some kind of a smishing campaign. We see a screenshot example on the right. The victim calls the fraudster in response to that SMS call of action. So this is one example of how the victim may be contacted by the fraudster. Keep in mind, there's a variety of tactics, and fraudsters are constantly changing their methods in response to how the banks are detecting scams and what type of education they're putting out there to the victims. So the fraudster, once contacted by the victim, impersonates a bank staff member and convinces the victim there's a very urgent need to transfer funds. They use a variety of tactics to do so, but once they convince the victim then logs into their bank account. So the fraudster is only acting offline at this point. Now, once the victim's convinced, they're logged in, the fraudster coerces the victim on the purpose and details of the payments and walks them through the transfer while the victim's online. The victim then completes the transfer, authorizes the payment, and the money is gone.
So the question becomes, what can we do about these scams? What should we do about these scams? And most important, who should we take charge? And it's not an easy set of questions to answer. So if you think about those steps that Erin talked about, when there's an impersonator reaching out to the victim, convincing them that they need to move all their money to a new account, or the tech support scam that I mentioned, or the romance scams, or the relationship scams that are crypto investment scams, there are many stakeholders across what I call the scam lifecycle that I'll talk about in a minute, that are participants in this. You have the telcos that allow the text messages and calls to go through social media platforms that host all these reach out messages and communities, and then the financial institutions, of course, that host the money. Interestingly, financial institutions today are on the hook to provide some relief to victims of online scams, and we'll talk about that a little too. We'll definitely see a lot of, and we're already starting to see a lot of finger pointing at social media companies and a request for telcos to do more. The reality is it will need to be a collaboration between all these stakeholders and data sharing in order to be able to really tackle these online scams. So let's talk about the scam lifecycle. Today, there are a few solutions on different points of the scam lifecycle, but they're not enough. Why? So a scam typically starts with an incoming message or call, or it can be social media or a group of crypto investment. And then that emotional manipulation happens. So first of all, the victim responds. And I was just providing training to 5th graders about security and told them, do not engage. Don't be funny with a criminal who's reaching out to you. Once you respond, they know that this is a real number with a person on the other side. So they cast a wide net. Don't respond, don't engage. But they do respond. And then they're put in this emotional state of fear or delight. And again, the amygdala takes charge. Then they transfer the money after the coercion happens and that convincing. They might realize, they might report to authorities. Again, less than 10% do report. And the recovery process might start. Recovery options are very limited, especially if the money goes overseas. There are some ways to investigate the blockchain for crypto investments, but that's really needle in a haystack. Today, most of the controls are on the payment rails, banks, credit card companies, but those are really focused on account takeover fraud. And there are some solutions today, and Erin will mention some later, that are able to detect scams. Now, it's really hard because fundamentally, the question that we asked ourselves for account takeover fraud or new account fraud is, are you who you claim to be? Is your digital identity, does it fit your real identity? But today with scams, that's not the right question. Yes, you are who you claim to be, but is your intent correct? Are you doing this for the right reasons? That's very, very hard to detect. There are some solutions that leverage behavioral biometrics that have some signals. And then finally, when it comes to incoming messages or calls, there are some solutions for robocall detection, phishing detection, basic filtering, but obviously that's not enough, especially when a lot happens on social media as well. So let's talk about what's happening in the world from a regulatory perspective and what governments are doing to take charge. So we'll give 3 examples. I'll start with the UK because the UK actually since 2018 has enforced a voluntary code which banks participated in to reimburse customers for scams, for authorized push payment scams. And recently 2 important things happened. One is the payment systems regulator announced a new regulation that will kick in and actually be mandated by 2024, where banks will need to reimburse customers 50-50 between the originating and the receiving bank. Will need to reimburse customers for a large number of these types of scams. And they also took action from an it's called action-driven perspective. They created this whole program where they're going to dedicate 400 flood fighters, and really this will be a collaboration between all the sectors, telco, financial, and banks as well. In Australia, they just announced it's also a huge problem. They understand the impact on the economy. They also announced an $86 million investment in fighting online scams, again, between law enforcement, financial institutions, driving that collaboration. And one of the things that we've been hearing from prosecutors and law enforcement is they do want to catch the criminals, of course, and that's always been their success metric, but they need to rethink the problem because now it's not going to always be about catching criminals unless we put pressure on countries where scams come from, which is typically Southeast Asia and Africa. It's really about seizing the money and disrupting the scam. And finally, in the US, there has been a lot of pressure in the Senate on the large financial institutions with regards to Zelle fraud, and the consumer groups are also focused on scams and their impact on Americans. And what we see is that early warning systems, the company that's responsible for Zelle, is mandating the bank members that are part of the Zelle network to reimburse customers for scams. But there is a lot of evolution globally. These are 3 examples of companies, and I truly believe that we'll see more, because the financial impact of scams is on scales that will impact these economies. So what can we do practically and pragmatically to mitigate and protect customers against scams?
Yeah, so there's a lot we can do, and it's recommended to take multiple different approaches to mitigate scams in your online environment. So first, we have education campaigns. So this is important in educating your user base, preventing scams from happening in the first place, and disrupting those fraudsters from harvesting information and online credentials. However, be aware of alert fatigue. Too much runs the risk of being ignored by your population. So, once you lose them, you may not be able to educate them on emerging tactics in scams. Next, we have in-session notifications. So this is a great approach that can be targeted. It can delay the action, which is important. As we talked about, there's a sense of urgency. The fraudster is pushing the victim to act immediately. And if we can get the victim to take pause and second guess the action they're about to take, that might be enough to stop them from, moving forward with a payment, for example. This also can limit some of that alert fatigue, education fatigue that might be out there.
And next, maybe I can give just 2 examples of in-session notification. So one approach that some financial institutions are taking, or one approach is asking when there's a transfer, do you know this person, and asking those types of questions. And another one is the gift card session notification. So actually at the point of sale, some gift card retailers have put questions about the nature of purchasing the gift card because of the size of the problem.
Great point, thank you. So on the detection and prevention front, this is important to add as a layer in addition to your education and in-session notification campaigns. This is a risk-based approach, so targeting only those activities that are elevated in risk of scam. This can help mitigate friction to your genuine population and any false positive activities. A layered approach is ideal. So using multiple different detection platforms. This is super important, having remote access tool capabilities, behavioral biometrics, transaction monitoring is key, and using a variety of different methods is going to increase your fraud capture rate and reduce the prevalence of scams. And finally, I want to talk about collaboration. So this is cross-industry collaboration. So as Ayelet mentioned earlier, this is everybody's problem. We may only be seeing the money movement in certain channels and certain verticals, but the scams start early. The telcos are victims, social media, they're victims as well. So it's really important to stop attacks across channels, so victims are not being contacted before it gets to the step of the bank or money movement. This will improve our broader industry knowledge of fraud MOs and different types of scam tactics out there, but also it's just going to make the internet a safer place for everyone.
So thank you so much for listening to this session. We're happy to connect on social media, or feel free to email us. Encourage you to listen to podcast ScamRangers, and we're happy to chat more. Both Erin and I are very passionate about this topic and stopping online scams.